All right, Pez fans, welcome to the program this week. It is the week ahead of Milan-San Remo. It's 2024. This is a time I love of every year because it kind of signals the start of not only the really big classics are coming, but for me, it kind of weather's getting better, riding is about to happen. And I remember in the earlier days, I was always so excited about getting ready for a race like Milan-San Remo, 300 kilometers from Milan to San Remo. And today, the way we're doing this preview is a little bit different. Instead of us just talking about it ourselves, I wanted to invite someone who's actually done the race and talk to it and really knows a whole lot more about what this race is like from the inside than we do. So special guesting with us today is Chris Horner.
Hi, guys. Hi, Richard.
Popular YouTuber, former pro racer, winner of La Vuelta a España. You've done a whole bunch of stuff, including riding Milan-San Remo, and that's what we want to talk about today is what makes this race cool. Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me. This should be an interesting talk. It's the first big one-day race, the first monument. So we know everybody starts getting excited once the big races start in each of the beginning of the season, and then in 2024, this is it. This is the big stuff, right? We've already started with Paris-Nice and Reno. Now we're going into Milan.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really interesting right now is that this season there's been so much hot racing happening already. Like the heavy hitters are coming out, everybody's firing. How do you think that is going to set us up for this race? But also, why do you think guys are racing so fast so early in the season?
Well, it started a few years back, right? It started sometime around COVID or maybe a year or two even before COVID when these early seasons became really important because I think a lot of the second tier riders understand that the early part of the season is when you can grab some results. You can get that exposure to your team. You can get that result, which of course can sign you to a contract already for the following year. And with the pro cycling teams over there in Europe, they sign riders to 1 and 2 year contracts. We haven't seen anything quite like two-door cycling where they're signing their riders to 3-year contracts. And remember, it's easier to grab the UCI points when you're at the Tour Down Under and you have 1/4 of the competition at the Tour Down Under versus what we're going to see when we're at Milan-San Remo.
And so bottom line is the pressure is on. There's no longer the comfort of knowing you're going to be with a team for multiple years. It's like you got to basically you're what did you do for me last weekend kind of a situation.
That is 100% it. It's you didn't win last weekend. I don't know if we want to renew you, but if you won last weekend, we'll renew you. And then once you're renewed, they know they have to keep interest in you because you have a multi-year with them, so they got reason to keep calling you up when you're at home and you haven't been racing to try to figure out where your form is, to try to motivate you to stay good, to bring you the training camps, to bring you the altitude camps, to bring you to the bigger races so that, okay, well, we want this kid over at the Tour de France here in July because we don't think he can win this in 2024 year, but maybe we're grooming him for something in 2025 or 2026 like we're seeing with two-door cycling.
Chris, how is it different from when you were racing? Like this mentality right now of guys, you've really got to be hot. You got to kind of look out for what's coming next year. What was the situation when you were racing?
Well, when you went into the early part of the season, you would get into the race and it would be a really easy start. A couple guys would go up the road. We'd ride easy for the first 50, 100 kilometers, and then you start racing hard at the finish of the race. It really was like those stories where you saw with Mario Cipollini controlling the peloton, keeping everything calm, and then it would start to explode at the finish of the race after you've seen the Seiko rider go back there and grab 10 helmets that he's got stuffed all around him. We're doing 50K an hour. It's strung out with Mario Cipollini's team on the front, and his Super Domestiques coming by me with 10 helmets, one he's wearing and nine for his teammates. Because in those days, it was 10 rider teams, right? We were bigger teams, the more riders in the race. The race was wider across the road. But because you had 10 rider teams, it was strung out more at the front, right? The faster guys were up there stringing the whole race out. And it really was a calmer beginning of the season.
Talking about that, taking it easier for the first part of saying, let's shift this over to Milan-San Remo and this race particular. 300 kilometers of racing, longest race on the calendar. I'm curious about, from your perspective as a pro, 300 kilometers is, any way you slice it, that is a long ways to ride.
Okay, I only did this race one time in the 90s with FDJ, 1999, I believe it was. And when I did it, I thought the same thing, like you just said. Wow, 300 kilometers. How are you going to get through it and stuff? But the first part goes by really quite quickly. The break goes fairly early into the race. It's Milan-San Remo's not like what we've seen at these earlier races. Normally, everyone's going to let the group go. They're going to set the tempo. So maybe it takes 30 kilometers at the most for a break to go. And then after that, it's a steady ride back there where you're just eating the whole time, which is the big difference between this race and a lot of the other races, is that you'll have more time to reach in your pocket, grab food. You understand it's 300K, so you have to keep eating throughout the race. But it will pass by really quick.
One thing that really stood out for me, I've been to San Remo a few times. The first time I saw the race was, I think, 1997. I was working for one of the tire companies in Milano, and I was basically in Milan for the start. Didn't go down to the finish. But I always wondered to myself, okay, it's cold, it's fairly dreary in Milan. You get down to the coast, and then by the time I finally went and saw the race for the first time, which was around 2012 or 13, I drove down. You drive over the Passo Turchino, you go through that little tunnel, and you come out, and literally crossing that range of mountains between the plain and the Ligurian coast, everything changes. You go through that tunnel, and I remember the thing that stood out for me was, boom, you can see the seaside, the air smells differently. There are palm trees all over the place. And it's like you've literally gone from winter through this tunnel and you are now in spring. Do you have any kind of recollection of that sensation, especially around this race where you're really transitioning from one climate around Milan and physically travel through this little bit of a time warp, and you come out in almost a paradise?
Yeah, I'd agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, that's why I lived in Nice in the 90s, is because the weather was that fantastic along the coast, where on the other side of the mountains, it's a different temperature, right? It's exactly as you described it. Now, the year I did it in the 90s, it was pretty good on both sides, but on the coast, you can smell the ocean. The hillside there, of course, blocks it, so you can't smell it, and you're 300 kilometers away from the finish when you start, so you're not going to smell the coast, of course. And that's kind of the beauty of Milan-San Remo too, is that change where you, as you said, you get into the sunshine, the season has started. You're like, wow, the season has started. Because of everything you described, the smell of the ocean and all that stuff, that wakens everybody up in the race to switch into race mode directly the moment they hit the coast. And that's why the action gets so exciting when you're watching it on television. And of course, the fans have a little bit more energy into them too, right? Because they're standing in the sunshine. They're living in the sunshine. They've woken up to it. It is springtime for them. So there's more atmosphere from the fans. And of course, the fans on the side of the road understand that we're coming into the climax there as we get onto the coast too. So they're more excited.
So you get down to the coast, the racing kind of starts heating up. Everybody wakes up. You've got like another still about 100 kilometers to go before you get there. Can you sort of take us through that last 50 where there's about 6 little climbs that come in, or sort of culminating with the Poggio? We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But, that first chunk of the race, how are you handling positioning in that race, food strategies? Like, what else is kind of going on for you as a racer in that first chunk of, say, 50 kilometers along the coast?
Each racer is going to look at it completely differently, right? You have racers that are going to be the early domestique riders. You have the super domestiques that are going to come in when they hit the small little climbs before the Cipressa and the Poggio. So every rider, you basically, as you described it, with 2 or 3 different divisions along the coast, there's 2 or 3 different type of riders and 2 or 3 riders that are focusing on the race differently. The GC, the favorites, so the big time favorites to win the race, they're still thinking the whole time, stay out of the wind, keep eating, stay at the front so that you don't get caught in the back between any crashes or something, because the roads are narrowing up so much when you get into those little towns that if there's a crash, you're going to get stuck back there. If you got a chase to get back on, you have 250 kilometers into your legs already. The last thing you want to do is be chasing to get all the way back to the front. So every rider is still 3 different category riders. They're still thinking differently. The early domestique riders are, how can I keep my favorite here to win, Milan-San Remo, out of the wind? How can I keep him fed? Is he taken care of? Is everything's okay? The super domestique rider, his whole thing is focusing on the Cipressa. You get into the late part along the coast there, they got to survive the couple early bumps. And these early bumps are not just bumps when you got 250 kilometers in your legs. They hurt. I remember in the 90s, it was very painful hitting those. And by the time you get to the Cipressa, I was already dropped because I was one of the early domestiques. So my job early in the 90s was to look after Max Chiandre and just make sure he had food and water. That's all I could do for him. I couldn't get him to the front. I couldn't keep him at the front. I could just go up there. Do you need anything? Here's some bottle. Here's some gels. Here's some food. Whatever I could do for him that way is what that type of rider is thinking about. The second type of domestique, the super domestique, is more keeping them up there as you're going up those small bumps. And then, of course, the super domestiques are leading your favorite rider into the Cipressa. And then, of course, if you can be there before the Poggio, then that's always a plus too. And then, of course, super domestiques are going to be taking Tadej Pogačar up the Cipressa and as fast as he possibly can.
By now, we're 250 kilometers into the race, which is the length of the toughest monuments and the biggest one-day races in cycling, but you still got another 50 to go here. How is the fatigue setting in? Those miles have got to be catching up, and really the hardest part of this race comes in those last 50 where the pace really hots up. Who's fresh? How do you even stay fresh after that long?
Okay, well, that's the difference between Milan-San Remo and the other monuments, is that this one really is not the toughest. It will wear you down to a point to where you no longer have power left in your legs. But when you compare it to Flanders, Paris-Roubaix, Lombardy, of course, Liège-Bastogne-Liège, Liège-Bastogne-Liège will just tear your legs up throughout the whole race. So when you start getting into Stavelot and stuff like that, your legs could already be cramping, your muscles could already be torn up. When you get into the finish of Milan-San Remo, your legs aren't torn up, they're just fatigued and tired. So there's a different sensation that the riders feel when you're doing Milan-San Remo and the racing really starts versus what you would see at the other monuments, where you have just accelerated and sprinted left and right out of all of the corners, fighting for the cobblestone sections, fighting for the famous climbs at LBL, and then, of course, Lombardy. Here, you haven't fought really to tear your muscles up. So you start getting into these bumps with 50 kilometers to go, 30 kilometers to go before the Cipressa starts. And you feel okay. You're like, oh, yeah, I feel fine. You're not destroyed. You just have this tiredness in the body that you weren't aware of. You thought you're feeling good. You're not destroyed. Your legs aren't cramping. The muscles aren't torn. You're not like out of your mind fatigued. But then you start hitting these bumps, and you just realize that no power is getting delivered to the pedals. You're like, what's going on? I don't understand what's happening here. I'm trying to push. It's just not happening. In your mind, basically the difference is, I think when I'm sitting here up on the chair here right now, when I think about it, the difference is you can't figure out why you're not able to accelerate the bike because your mind still feels fresh, right? It hasn't been fatigued. The other races, especially something like Paris-Roubaix and Flanders, your mind is so tired from racing because of the stress of 5 hours of racing before the finish of the last 5 hours. So once you get into the last hour, your mind is fatigued, your body is sore, your butt is sore from sitting on the saddle and bumping around and stuff. Maybe you've crashed, maybe you've been stopped. You certainly have done more accelerations and more power on the pedal than you thought was imaginable. But here at Milan-San Remo, none of that has happened. All has happened here is that the fatigue of 250K has magically finally popped into your head that, wow, I'm tired. We're hitting these little bumps, and I'm trying to get to the front, but I can't get to the front, but I don't know why, because your mind still feels pretty fresh compared to the other races. So this race is completely different than the other four monuments, and for that matter, different than any other one-day race on the calendar, for sure.
So it's really, listening to you describe it, it's really like that screw just turning, the turning of the screw. This is maybe even where they invented that term, because it just kind of just keeps getting to you. So
yeah, right.
This race historically really now comes down to these last two climbs, and even it's really the last climb. It's going to be together whoever's left on the Poggio. This is how this race is going to be decided somewhere. You get into these last two climbs. Can you just kind of take us through what's going on in the peloton now? We've got the Cipressa comes just before the Poggio. You get off of that, you got about a kilometer of flat road, and then you're back up the Poggio. the both climbs, they're not super high. The gradient is maybe 3-4%. They're not really steep. They're super fast. They're big ring climbs, and it's full gas over those things. So after 7 hours of racing, it's coming down to this last half an hour. This is what the action is. What's it like in the peloton? What are you guys thinking, and what's going on for those racers?
Okay, well, I'll take a guess on what's going on because I haven't been up there on the Poggio and the Cipressa, of course, when it's the end of the race, because I've only done it one time and I was dropped right when those climbs started. So coming down to a lot of the riders, you look at Matej Mohorič, we'll take him. He won Milan-San Remo a couple years back on that daring descent with his dropper post. And a little bit of help from the motorcycle in front of him. But so a rider like Matej Mohorič is going into the Cipressa and the Poggio, and he's thinking, save energy, save energy, save energy. Do not touch the wind. Don't touch the wind. Stay where you're at. Stay where you're at. Do I have to move up because I want to stay where I'm at? And so he has to look at the 15 or 20 riders in front of him, and he has to think like, okay, there's Pogačar on the front. Matthew Van Der Poel's there, Wout van Aert's there, whoever these top riders are that's going to be here in 2024, you could replace their names with the ones I'm mentioning. And he's going to look and see the best of the best are in front of him. He's not one of the best, okay? No matter what, I know he won Milan-San Remo. I know he is a very, very good rider. But he is not the best of the best when we get into the climbs. So a rider like himself has to do a calculation. And he has to be right about his calculation when he hits the Cipressa to look in front of him and go, I'm safe. There's nobody in front of me that will open a gap. Or if there is somebody in front of me, what he should be thinking is, let's say it's Caleb Ewan in front of him. And he sees Caleb Ewan. He goes, wow, Caleb Ewan could possibly open up a gap here in front of me. But if he does, I know his two teammates that I see right by him will get to the front and they'll ride over the Cipressa. They'll ride down the descent. They'll hit the valley road or they'll hit the coast road. And then they'll go full gas and they'll close up that 10-second, 25-second gap that he has to the front group. So that's how a rider like Matej Mohorič is thinking. The sprinters, they're thinking basically the same thing Matej Mohorič is thinking, with the exception that they're looking around you and they're going, Caleb Ewan is looking around. He's like, do I have somebody here that I know I can climb with, and will that rider help me get back to the front group? Because they're going to get dropped. Okay, when Pogačar throws down on the pedals, a rider like Caleb Ewan, unless he comes with his absolute best form that we have seen him at here at Milan-San Remo, where he's focused on winning it, that rider is still thinking, who do I have around me that will help me get back to that front group? A Tadej Pogačar is thinking exactly kind of the opposite, because he's like, how do I drop these guys? How do I get rid of the Matej Mohoričs? How do I certainly get rid of the sprinters? So each rider has their own class and their own thinking when they get into the last two climbs here at Milan-San Remo, and for good reason. But you have to be very good at the calculations each time, right? Matthew Van Der Poel last year, 100% when they were going up to Poggio, and Pogačar was smashing it. He's looking over at Wout going, man, I'm going to make Wout close this. If Wout closes this, I can save my explosive energy for 200 meters before the top. Now, when I was watching it, sitting at home on the Chesterfield, I was like, he is working his magic right here on Wout. And Wout closed all the gaps. And then, of course, he lit everybody up with 200 meters. Because Tadej Pogačar was hands down the best, of course, last year. So each rider, depending on what your strength is going into these climbs as survival. While the domestiques are going into it, get my guy to the front. The sprinters are going into it, survive, don't touch the front. The super domestiques are blow this race up. And then, of course, the pure climbers in there, and the riders like Matthew Van Der Poel, Wout van Aert, who's not doing it this year, of course, but in years past, those types of riders are looking at blowing the race to pieces, going over with a small group into the finish so that they can win the sprint, or possibly drop everyone on the descent.
You know what? It's going to be an exciting race. It always comes down to a bunch of guys going crazy on there. So why don't we talk a little bit about those bunch of guys? Who are you liking for this race? We've just seen some really good racing at Tirreno Adriatico and Paris-Nice, and those historically are really the big tune-ups for San Remo. Those guys are hot. They're on great form. Who are you liking so far? We've been talking about Pogačar, but who else is there that you've got your eye on for this week?
Okay, as you said, Pogačar is going to be the one that's going to highlight the end of the race. Win it, maybe not, but he's going to highlight the end of the race without a doubt. with his fine form that he had from Strade Bianche. When we look back from him, Mathieu van der Poel, last year's winner, has to be the number one favorite to win again. And this is crazy, right? Richard, when was the last time you would pick a rider? You just got done saying yourself that the riders come from Tirreno Adriatico and Paris-Nice, right? But yet, maybe I'll ask you specifically, do you think Mathieu van der Poel's the outright favorite to win?
I'll tell you what. Here's what I think about this race. My feeling is that I'm expecting a surprise. I know there are always guys who are very good, but if I look at that winners list, there's been a different winner for the last 5 or 6 or 7. Every year it's somebody else, and it's like, whoa. He sort of was a guy, but then there've been some surprises in there. So I'm kind of, as a betting man, I'm kind of going, you know what? I expect to be surprised.
Right. Well, I mean, we should be surprised if Mathieu van der Poel wins. He hasn't raced his bike. And this is going to come in. This is going to be his first race. And even though this new generation of bike racers in the past, you would never put Mathieu van der Poel down as a favorite. But now he has to be the favorite, and we haven't even seen him race. But we saw Tadej Pogacar win coming into his first race. We've seen Jonas Vingegaard win coming in his first race and drop everyone. Both those two riders did. And even Remco Evenepoel did and drop everyone at his first race, right? And so we expect to see Mathieu van der Poel come in and win Milan-San Remo. I would imagine everyone's sitting at home. If they're arguing with me, I don't know where they're getting their arguments from, because that's what I expect to see for sure. And he hasn't raced Tirreno Adriatico and he hasn't raced Paris-Nice. But when you look at the riders that have raced those two races, okay, we're going to see Mads Pedersen. He's going to be up there, of course, from Trek. And Mads has help, right? He has Jonathan Milan, and he just got done winning stages at Tirreno Adriatico. So he's going to come in there. And Mads Pedersen's been winning the early part of the season, but of course finished up with 2 seconds where he led out the sprint from 300 meters at 2 of the sprint stages at Paris-Nice and lost to Olaf Koy. And Olaf Koy is going to come in for a Visma Lease bike, and he's going to be one of the outright favorites after his 2 stage victories at Paris-Nice. So it's not going to be a surprise if Mathieu van der Poel doesn't win, but it will be a surprise if he doesn't highlight the race with one of the biggest favorites that we know that's going to affect the outcome of the race. Yeah. But remember, if we looked at last year, for sure, I believe 100%, if Wout van Aert doesn't close the gap, and Mathieu van der Poel has to close that gap instead of Wout van Aert, he most likely doesn't win Milan-San Remo because he doesn't have that 200 meters of explosiveness at the top of the Poggio to be able to drop everyone and then go down the descent and solo. So it's a completely different race last year with that one tactic of Mathieu van der Poel where he's looking at Wout van Aert to close that gap to Tadej Pogacar. If Wout doesn't close it and Mathieu van der Poel has to, that is the explosive energy that he had on the Poggio there to be able to drop all those riders and go over solo.
I'll throw one more thing here at you, because we've seen this race being won on the descent of the Poggio. So explosive climbing power for sure. You got to be there to get over the top of those guys. But the idea is, it's almost like the reinvention of an old idea, and that is winning a race or attacking on a descent, which we have started to see a lot more in recent years. Guys actually bring in the speed and the daredevilness back to racing. So, that could easily throw another wrench into this thing. Can someone come out and go fast downhill?
Okay, I know we saw Matej Mohorič win, but in all fairness, he's behind the motorcycle. It is too much. It was too much behind the motorcycle when I looked at it. I don't care about his drop or C-post. I don't think that actually helped him in any way whatsoever. If he wants to believe that, we'll see if the drop or C-post comes back on, whether or not if he believes it or not. But I believe he's behind the motorcycle. Mathieu van der Poel, though, I believe he did secure the win. He won it going up over the Poggio, of course, but I believe he secured it on the descent because the guy can handle the bike as good as anyone. I mean, maybe Tom Pidcock. Okay, if we were talking about surprises and let's say Tom Pidcock showed up, that is a guy that could go down the descent and possibly win going down the descent to drop everyone.
Yeah.
But I don't honestly believe that Matej Mohorič dropped everyone on the descent. He got a gap. I think that gap would have come back if there wasn't for the motorcycles in the front. And the risk he was taking going down the descent, when I look at it, I think he could have been losing time with how risky he was a couple of those times when he has the bike locked up. So The butterfly effect on my channel. I'm going to say it the way I believe I saw it. And I think Matej Mohorič won because of the motorcycle.
All
But
right. Okay, well, good.
Matthew Vanderpool certainly won because of his bike handling skills going downhill, where you saw the riders behind Tadej Pogačar, Wout van Aert could not go through the corners and accelerate out of the corners the way Matthew Vanderpool was doing. He was exceptional, and I think guys will talk about Matej Mohorič winning down the descent, but I don't think it really happened that way. So,
All right.
So of course on my channel, when I'm doing the YouTube stuff, I'm always maybe too honest, sometimes too blunt, and I'm going to call it like I see it. So Matej Mohorič won, the motorcycle was in front. Those are the facts. But Matthew Vanderpool won going downhill faster than anyone chasing him because nobody gained time on him. And the organizers did a really good job of making sure that none of the motorcycles were close enough to him to really be helping him out.
I think that's one of the reasons why people like watching your stuff on YouTube, because you are not pulling any punches and you're just saying the stuff that you're telling it like you see it. It's beautiful. It's refreshing. And I'm a fan of that. I love that stuff.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. We got a ton of hours of work put into that stuff, so hopefully everyone enjoys it. A lot of times when they're coming to the channel, they'll call the channel a recap, and I'm like, I am not a recap channel. If I was a recap channel, my show would be up 15 minutes after the race. We analyze the races, we do coaching, we do stories, and we tell exactly what was really happening in the race from my 25 years of bike racing experience. But yes, I don't do a recap on the butterfly effect. I'm telling you what really happened in the race and analyzing the race, and I'm giving coaching for the young pros that are racing their bike to understand. So that's the way I like to call it in the show. But I'm realistic like that. But once we get to Milan-San Remo, it's going to be an exciting race, and we're going to see some daredevil descents for sure. There's going to be attacking going down the descents, attacking going up the climbs. And each rider has their own category and their own way to focus on the race. So when you're sitting at home on the Chesterfield, then you got to understand that when you're looking at these riders, this is what this type of rider's thinking, this is what this type of rider's thinking, and this is what another type of rider's thinking that could win it.
It's going to be an awesome race. I always look forward to this race. So viewers can tune in to your YouTube channel Monday morning next week, or Sunday morning. Will you be
Sunday? Yeah. We do it. We put it up right after the race, but it takes hours after the race for us to do it. The butterfly effect is always about that race of that day, so it comes up the same time. It comes up after the race, but it takes me hours to go back and look at the race and grab the details that I want. Because from my experience, I understand if something happened at 150 kilometers to go, that was the effect of where it's really started happening kilometers before there. So I want to find the whole story. I want to paste it together so that everyone understands when they're watching the bike race of what kind of work and what actions and reactions happened throughout the race and why the outcome looked the way that it did.
Yeah, you know what it is? It's an awesome deep dive. I liked how you sort of commented on the fact that it really is helpful for young riders too. If you want to learn how to race your bike, your channel and the stuff that you're talking about it's chock-a-block full of really amazing insights. So we'll be looking forward to that. This week ahead on Pez, one thing we love to do is just focus on what's coming up. We love the preview. We love the anticipation, the build up to the race itself. So we will have more previews coming all week long, including the one you're watching right now. But keep it dialed to Pez as we head into this first of the big monuments, San Remo. Chris, I think that kind of wraps up what we we could keep talking about this all day, but I think
all week. And we go for hours. There's no doubt about it.
I know, but I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe that's just enough for right now. We can just let that sink in. And
perfect.
Well, listen, Chris, thank you so much for talking to us on Pez. This is going to be an awesome preview. Looking forward to the race and also what you have to say in terms of analyzing it on Saturday after it's over, after the dust settles in San Remo.
I'll see you real soon. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks.